The chilling cry of a newborn baby echoed through the abandoned shed as the Montana winter of 1878 howled outside, threatening to drown out the infant's desperate wails. Tabitha Moore pressed her trembling lips to her daughter's forehead, tears freezing on her cheeks as she tried to comprehend how her husband of 2 years could have left them here to die. "Hush now, little one," Tabitha whispered, her voice weak from exhaustion. The birth had been difficult, and with no one to help, she'd nearly lost consciousness several times. Now, wrapped in a thin blanket that did little against the bitter cold, she cradled her newborn daughter against her chest, trying to share what little warmth remained in her body. 3 days ago, Harold Moore had driven their wagon to this remote hunting cabin, claiming they needed shelter from an approaching storm. When Tabitha's labor pains had started, he'd become agitated, pacing the small shed like a caged animal. By morning, with the baby halfway into the world, he'd saddled up and ridden away, muttering something about getting help. He never returned. The sound of hoofbeats outside startled Tabitha from her semi-conscious state. Her heart leaped with both hope and fear. Had Harold returned? Or was it someone else, perhaps someone worse? The wooden door creaked open, sending a blast of cold air into the shed. Tabitha clutched her baby tighter, trying to shield the infant from the freezing wind. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, snow swirling around his broad shoulders. When he stepped inside, Tabitha could see he wore a weathered duster and a wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice. His beard was flecked with snow, but his eyes were kind as they took in the scene before him. "Good Lord above," the stranger breathed, quickly shutting the door behind him. "Madam, are you all right?" Tabitha tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She merely shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. The man crossed the room in 3 long strides, crouching beside her. "I'm Quentin Walsh. I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." His gaze fell to the tiny bundle in her arms. "Is that a baby?" Tabitha nodded weakly. "My husband. He left 3 days ago." Quentin's expression hardened, but his voice remained gentle. "Let's get you both somewhere warm. My cabin isn't far." Before Tabitha could protest, he was wrapping his own coat around her and the baby. With surprising tenderness for such a large man, he lifted them both into his arms and carried them outside to where his horse waited. "Hold on tight now," he instructed, mounting the horse with Tabitha cradled against him. "What's your name, madam?" "Tabitha," she whispered against his chest. "Tabitha Moore. And this is—" "I haven't named her yet." Quentin guided his horse carefully through the snow. "Well, Mrs. Moore, I'm going to get you and your daughter somewhere safe. I promise you that." As they rode through the falling snow, Tabitha felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the solid warmth of the cowboy's chest against her cheek lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when they arrived at a modest cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. It looked like paradise to her frozen eyes. Quentin dismounted with care not to jostle her or the baby, then carried them inside where a fire blazed in the hearth. "Mrs. Abernathy," he called. An older woman emerged from the kitchen area, her eyes widening at the sight of Tabitha and the infant. "Merciful heavens," the woman gasped. "Quentin Walsh, what have you brought home now?" "I found them in the old Miller hunting shed," Quentin explained, gently laying Tabitha on a sofa near the fire. "Her husband left them there." Mrs. Abernathy's face darkened with anger, but she quickly composed herself and bustled forward. "Let me see that baby, dear," she said to Tabitha. "I was a midwife for 30 years before I came to work for this stubborn cowboy." Reluctantly, Tabitha allowed the woman to take her child. Mrs. Abernathy examined the infant with expert hands. "She's a fighter, this one," the older woman announced. "Underweight, but strong. Now let's have a look at you, Mama." While Mrs. Abernathy tended to Tabitha and the baby, Quentin moved about the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing hot drinks. Tabitha watched him through half-closed eyes, wondering why a stranger would show such kindness when her own husband had abandoned her. "Drink this," he said, returning with a steaming mug. "It'll warm you from the inside out." Tabitha took a small sip of the sweet tea, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." Quentin shook his head. "No need for that. Anyone with a decent heart would have done the same." But Tabitha knew that wasn't true. Her husband hadn't had a decent heart, though she'd been blind to it until it was too late. Mrs. Abernathy will help you get cleaned up, Quentin said, heading toward the door. I've got to see to my horse and check on the cattle. You'll be safe here. After he left, Mrs. Abernathy helped Tabitha bathe and change into a clean nightgown. The older woman washed the newborn as well, wrapping her in soft flannel blankets. That man, Mrs. Abernathy said as she worked, has the biggest heart in the territory. Found me 3 years back when my wagon broke down on the way to Oregon. I was too old to continue the journey alone, so he offered me a position keeping house for him. She chuckled. Never thought I'd end up a housekeeper at my age, but the good Lord works in mysterious ways. Tabitha cradled her freshly bathed daughter, marveling at how much better they both felt. He seems like a good man. The best, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed, though lonelier than he lets on. Now, have you thought of a name for this little one? Tabitha gazed down at her daughter's face. Despite everything, the baby looked peaceful now, her tiny features relaxed in sleep. Hope, Tabitha decided. Her name is Hope. Over the next few days, Tabitha regained her strength under Mrs. Abernathy's care. The older woman taught her how to nurse Hope properly and helped when the baby grew fussy in the night. Quentin kept a respectful distance, but Tabitha often caught him watching her with a thoughtful expression. He spent most daylight hours outside, tending to his small herd of cattle and horses, but in the evenings, he would sit by the fire and tell stories of his adventures in the West. On the fourth night, after Mrs. Abernathy had retired to her room, Quentin finally asked the question Tabitha had been dreading. Your husband, he began carefully. Do you think he'll come looking for you? Tabitha stared into the flames. No, she answered honestly. Harold never wanted a child. When he discovered I was with child, he changed, became angry, distant. I think he brought me to that shed intending to leave us all along. Quentin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Then he's no kind of man at all. I was a fool, Tabitha whispered. I thought he loved me. You weren't a fool, Quentin said firmly. He was the fool for not seeing what he had. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something more. The next morning, Quentin was gone before dawn. Mrs. Abernathy explained he'd ridden to town for supplies and to ask about Harold Moore. He wants to make sure that man can't hurt you again, the housekeeper said as she helped Tabitha change Hope's swaddling cloths. He shouldn't trouble himself, Tabitha protested. Harold is likely halfway to California by now. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Quentin Walsh takes care of his own, and like it or not, the moment he brought you through that door, you became his responsibility in his mind. Tabitha pondered these words as she went about her day, finding herself watching the window for Quentin's return more often than she cared to admit. It was nearly dusk when he finally rode up to the cabin. Tabitha stood in the doorway with Hope in her arms, relief washing over her at the sight of him. Quentin dismounted, his expression unreadable as he approached. We need to talk, he said quietly. Inside, after he'd warmed himself by the fire and Mrs. Abernathy had taken Hope to give them privacy, Quentin revealed what he'd learned in town. Your husband is telling folks you died in childbirth, he said bluntly. He's already sold your homestead and was last seen boarding a train east with a woman who is definitely not his wife. Tabitha felt strangely numb at this news. So I'm dead. According to him, yes. Quentin leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. There's something else. He's got creditors looking for him. Seems he borrowed money all over the territory with no intention of paying it back. I had no idea, Tabitha whispered. I believe you, Quentin assured her. But it presents a problem. If you show up in town using your real name, those creditors might come after you for his debts. Tabitha's heart sank. She'd lost everything: her husband, her home, even her identity. There's a solution, Quentin said slowly. But I don't know if you'll like it. What is it? You could stay here with me. He held up a hand to stop her protest. Not like that. What I mean is, we could tell people you're my wife, that I married a widow from back east and brought you here. It would give you protection, respectability, and a home for you and Hope. Tabitha stared at him in disbelief. You do that? For strangers? Quentin's eyes softened. You're not strangers anymore. And yes, I would. But why? What do you gain from this arrangement? He looked away, a faint color rising in his cheeks. I've been alone a long time. Having a family, even if it's not real. It would be nice. Before Tabitha could respond, Hope began crying in the next room. Mrs. Abernathy brought her in, and the conversation was set aside as Tabitha tended to her daughter. That night, as she lay in bed with Hope sleeping beside her, Tabitha considered Quentin's offer. It was unconventional, perhaps even scandalous if the truth ever came out. But it offered safety and stability for her child. And there was something about Quentin Walsh, his quiet strength, his kindness that made her want to trust him. In the morning, she found him at the corral, mending a section of fence. For a moment, she simply watched him work, admiring the competent way he handled the tools and the gentleness he showed to the curious horse that came to investigate. I'll accept your offer, she said when he finally noticed her. But I have conditions. Quentin set down his hammer. Name them. This will be a marriage in name only, Tabitha stated firmly. I won't share your bed. He nodded without hesitation. Of course. And if I ever decide to leave, you won't stop me. I would never force anyone to stay where they don't want to be, he assured her. Tabitha took a deep breath. Then I guess I'm your wife now, Mr. Walsh. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I guess you are, Mrs. Walsh. They rode to the nearest town 2 days later, where Quentin introduced Tabitha as his new bride to the curious townsfolk. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered to fit her, and Hope was wrapped snugly in a new blanket Quentin had purchased. Married her back in St. Louis, he told the shopkeeper as they bought supplies. Her first husband passed last year, left her with the little one. The shopkeeper's wife cooed over baby Hope. She's got your eyes, Mr. Walsh. Quentin didn't correct her, and Tabitha felt a strange flutter in her chest when he smiled down at Hope with genuine affection. As winter settled over the ranch, Tabitha and Quentin established a comfortable routine. He slept in a small room off the kitchen while she and Hope took the main bedroom. During the day, Tabitha helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks and gradually took over more responsibilities as her strength returned. Quentin taught her about ranch life, how to feed the chickens without getting pecked, which horses were gentle enough for her to handle, and how to recognize the signs of an approaching storm. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Quentin would carve small wooden toys for Hope, while Tabitha mended clothes or read aloud from one of the few books in the house. It was during these quiet moments that Tabitha began to see the man beneath the cowboy exterior. Quentin was well-read and thoughtful, with a dry wit that sometimes caught her by surprise. He spoke little of his past, but she gathered he'd come west as a young man, worked as a ranch hand until he could afford his own land, and had been building his modest spread ever since. Don't you ever get lonely out here? She asked one evening in late January. A blizzard raged outside, but inside the cabin was warm and snug. Quentin considered her question. I used to, he admitted. Less so now. Their eyes met briefly before he returned his attention to the piece of wood in his hands. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked down at her sewing. As the weeks passed, Hope grew stronger and more alert. She began to recognize faces, smiling toothlessly when Quentin or Mrs. Abernathy spoke to her. To Tabitha's surprise, Quentin showed a natural affinity with the baby, never hesitating to hold her or walk the floor with her when she was fussy. You're good with her, Tabitha observed one afternoon as Quentin gently bounced Hope in his arms. She makes it easy, he replied, his expression softening as he looked down at the infant. She's a good judge of character, this one. February brought milder weather, and Quentin began preparing for spring calving season. He worked from dawn till dusk, coming in only for meals, often too tired for their evening conversations. Tabitha found herself missing his company more than she expected. She began leaving a plate of food warming by the fire for him and waiting up until he returned, no matter how late. One night, after a particularly long day, Quentin came in to find Tabitha asleep in the chair by the fire, a book open on her lap. He stood watching her for a moment, then gently covered her with a blanket. The movement woke her, and she blinked up at him in confusion. What time is it? Late, he said softly. You should be in bed. I wanted to make sure you ate something. She gestured to the plate on the table. Quentin's expression was unreadable in the dim light. Thank you, he said finally. But you don't need to wait up for me. I know I don't need to, Tabitha replied. I want to. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. March arrived with its unpredictable weather and the first of the new calves. Quentin was busier than ever, and Tabitha found ways to help, taking over more of Mrs. Abernathy's duties so the older woman could assist with meals and laundry for the 2 ranch hands Quentin had hired temporarily. One afternoon, Tabitha decided to bring lunch to Quentin and the men in the south pasture. With Hope secured in a sling across her chest, she rode the gentle mare Quentin had been training her on. The men were grateful for the fresh bread and cold meat she'd brought, but Quentin seemed troubled. You shouldn't be riding out here alone, he said when they had a moment apart from the others. I'm hardly alone, Tabitha replied, nodding toward Hope, who was contentedly sleeping against her chest. And you said yourself that Daisy is the gentlest horse on the ranch. That's not the point. Quentin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. It's not safe for a woman to be riding across open country by herself. I'm not helpless, Quentin, Tabitha said, bristling at his tone. And this is supposed to be my home too, isn't it? Or am I just playing a part for the benefit of the townspeople? His expression softened. Of course it's your home. I just worry, that's all. Well, stop worrying. I'm stronger than I look. She turned to go, but he caught her arm. I know you are, he said quietly. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands called for Quentin's help with a difficult calf. We'll talk more tonight, he promised before hurrying away. But when evening came, Quentin was called away to help a neighboring rancher whose barn had caught fire. He didn't return until the following afternoon, exhausted and smelling of smoke. Tabitha met him at the door, relief evident on her face. I was worried. Fire's out, he reported wearily. Nobody hurt, but Thornton lost his barn and most of his feed. You need rest, Tabitha said, taking his arm and leading him inside. I've drawn a bath, and there's stew keeping warm. Quentin looked at her with surprise. You don't have to fuss over me. That's what wives do, isn't it? The words slipped out before she could stop them, and they both froze. After a moment, Quentin's mouth curved into a tired smile. I suppose they do. As spring fully arrived, the ranch burst into activity. Tabitha found herself busy from dawn till dusk, helping with the vegetable garden, tending to Hope, who was now trying to roll over, and keeping the house running smoothly as Mrs. Abernathy's arthritis flared up. Quentin and his men worked equally hard, branding calves, mending fences, and preparing to move the herd to summer pastures. Despite their busy schedules, Tabitha noticed Quentin made a point to spend time with Hope each day, often taking her out to sit on the porch in the evening air. It was during one such evening in late April that Mrs. Abernathy approached Tabitha in the kitchen. That man is falling in love with you, the older woman stated bluntly. Tabitha nearly dropped the plate she was drying. Don't be ridiculous. I'm old, not blind, Mrs. Abernathy retorted. The question is, what are you going to do about it? There's nothing to do, Tabitha insisted. We have an arrangement, that's all. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Keep telling yourself that, girl. But I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching. Before Tabitha could deny it, Hope began crying from the porch, and she hurried outside to find Quentin already soothing the baby. She got startled by a hawk, he explained, gently bouncing Hope in his arms. But we're all right now, aren't we, little one? The tenderness in his voice made Tabitha's heart constrict. Was Mrs. Abernathy right? Was she falling for this kind, steady man who had rescued her in her darkest hour? And more terrifyingly, was he falling for her? The question haunted her in the following days. She found herself watching Quentin more closely, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were rough from work but always gentle with Hope, how he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. One afternoon in early May, Tabitha was hanging laundry when she heard a wagon approaching. Visitors were rare at the remote ranch, and she shaded her eyes to see who it might be. A well-dressed woman sat beside the driver, her posture rigid and her expression severe. Tabitha felt a strange sense of foreboding as the wagon drew closer. Hello there, the driver called as they pulled up to the house. Is Quentin Walsh about? He's out checking the north pasture, Tabitha replied. Can I help you? The woman studied Tabitha with undisguised curiosity. And you are? Tabitha Walsh, Quentin's wife. The words still felt strange on her tongue, even after all these months. The woman's eyebrows rose. Wife? How interesting. I'm Victoria Calloway, Quentin's cousin. Tabitha's stomach dropped. Quentin had never mentioned any family. Please, come inside, she managed to say. You must be tired after your journey. Victoria followed her into the house, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Quentin never mentioned he'd married. When did this happy event occur? Last winter, Tabitha answered, keeping her voice steady. It was a small ceremony. I see. And the child I heard crying. Our daughter, Hope. Victoria's lips pursed. Quentin always said he had no interest in family life. Said it would interfere with his plans for the ranch. Before Tabitha could respond, Mrs. Abernathy entered from the kitchen. To Tabitha's relief, the housekeeper showed no surprise at the visitor. Miss Calloway, Mrs. Abernathy greeted her. It's been some years. Mrs. Abernathy. Still keeping house for my cousin, I see. And helping with the baby now. The older woman replied smoothly. Can I get you some refreshment after your journey? While Mrs. Abernathy distracted Victoria with tea and conversation, Tabitha slipped outside, her heart pounding. This unexpected visitor threatened everything. If Victoria discovered their marriage was a fraud, what would happen to her and Hope? She was so lost in her worried thoughts that she didn't hear Quentin's approach until he spoke. Tabitha, what's wrong? She whirled to face him. Your cousin is here. Victoria Calloway. Quentin's face darkened. Victoria? What the devil is she doing here? I don't know, but she's asking questions about our marriage. About Hope. Tabitha wrung her hands. Quentin, she'll know we're lying. He placed his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. Listen to me. Victoria and I haven't spoken in 5 years. She has no claim on this ranch or any right to question my life. But what if she tells people in town? What if she, let me handle Victoria, Quentin interrupted. Just follow my lead, all right? Tabitha nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. When they entered the house together, Victoria was examining a small wooden horse that Quentin had carved for Hope. Cousin, Quentin greeted her, his arm around Tabitha's waist. This is an unexpected visit. Victoria set down the toy. Clearly, I had to hear about your marriage from strangers in town. I wasn't aware I needed your approval. Quentin replied evenly. Of course not. But family should know these things, shouldn't they? Victoria's gaze shifted to Tabitha. Your wife was just telling me how you met. Tabitha felt Quentin's arm tighten slightly around her. Was she? Actually, we were interrupted, Tabitha said. I was about to explain how you rescued me and Hope during that terrible blizzard last winter. Quentin picked up the thread smoothly. Tabitha's wagon broke down on her way to visit her sister in Helena. If I hadn't found them, they might not have survived the night. How fortunate, Victoria murmured. And you married shortly after? When you know something's right, why wait? Quentin countered. Hope began crying from the bedroom, and Tabitha excused herself, grateful for the momentary escape from Victoria's probing questions. When she returned with the baby, Victoria was telling Quentin about her late husband's estate in St. Louis and how she'd come west to settle some business matters. I'll be staying in town for a few weeks, she informed them. Perhaps you could bring your family for dinner at the hotel sometime. Perhaps, Quentin replied noncommittally. After Victoria finally departed, promising to visit again soon, Tabitha sank into a chair with relief. I'm sorry, Quentin said, pacing the room. I should have warned you about her. Victoria has always been difficult. She doesn't believe we're really married, Tabitha stated. Probably not. Victoria suspects everyone of something. He stopped pacing and looked at her. But it doesn't matter what she believes. This is our home, our life. The way he said, our, made Tabitha's heart flutter. What if she causes trouble? Then we'll face it together. His gaze was steady, reassuring. I meant what I told her. When something's right, you know it. That night, Tabitha lay awake, replaying his words in her mind. Was he just maintaining their cover story, or was he trying to tell her something more? The next morning, Quentin announced he needed to ride into town on business. Victoria stirred up some questions I need to address, he explained. I'll be back by nightfall. Tabitha spent the day anxiously waiting for his return, imagining all the ways Victoria might be trying to undermine them. When Quentin finally rode in just after sunset, She hurried out to meet him. "What happened?" she asked as he dismounted. "Victoria's been asking questions all over town," he confirmed. Fortunately, most folks seem more amused by her interest than suspicious. "Did you see her?" "Yes. We had a long conversation." Quentin led his horse toward the barn. "She thinks I married you for your money." Tabitha gave a startled laugh. "What money?" "Exactly. I told her you were a woman of modest means who had stolen my heart. She didn't believe me, of course, but I think I convinced her to keep her opinions to herself." "How did you manage that?" Quentin smiled grimly. "I reminded her of certain family matters she'd prefer to keep private. Victoria values her reputation above all else." As they entered the barn, Tabitha helped him unsaddle his horse. Their hands brushed as they worked, and Tabitha felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, "for protecting us." Quentin paused, his eyes finding hers in the dim light of the barn. "You don't need to thank me. You and Hope. You're my family now." The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. Before she could respond, he stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I know this started as an arrangement," he said quietly, "but it's become something more for me. I need you to know that." Tabitha's heart pounded in her ears. "Quentin, you don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know where I stand." He moved to step away, but Tabitha caught his hand. "It's become something more for me, too," she whispered. For a long moment, they stood there, hands clasped, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quentin lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning nothing like the demanding kisses Harold had given her. When they finally parted, Tabitha felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. "We should go inside," Quentin said softly. "Mrs. Abernathy will be wondering where we are." That night, for the first time, Quentin joined Tabitha and Hope in the main bedroom. He slept on a pallet beside the bed, close enough that Tabitha could hear his steady breathing, yet maintaining the respectful distance he'd always promised. In the days that followed, their relationship changed subtly. Quentin would brush his hand against hers when they passed in the kitchen. Tabitha would let her fingers linger on his shoulder when she brought him coffee. In the evenings, they sat closer together by the fire, sometimes with their hands entwined. Mrs. Abernathy observed these developments with obvious satisfaction, but made no comment beyond a knowing smile. As May gave way to June, the ranch grew busier than ever. Quentin hired additional hands for the summer work, and Tabitha found herself cooking for a crew of hungry men. One evening, after the workers had gone to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy had retired for the night, Quentin found Tabitha on the porch, gazing at the stars. "Hope asleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench. "Finally. She's trying to crawl now. Nothing is safe." Quentin chuckled. "She's determined, like her mother." Tabitha smiled at the compliment, then hesitated before asking, "Quentin, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Before Victoria came, were you planning to tell me how you felt?" He considered this. "Honestly, I was afraid to. I didn't want you to feel obligated or pressured. You came here needing safety, not romance. And now I think maybe you need both. Just like I do." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been alone a long time, Tabitha. I never thought I'd find someone who made me want to change that." Tabitha leaned against his shoulder. "I was so afraid after Harold left us, not just of dying in that shed, but of trusting anyone ever again." "I know, but you never asked for anything in return for helping us. You just gave." Quentin turned to face her. "Because that's what love is, Tabitha. It gives without expecting anything back." "Love." The word hung in the air between them. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you. And Hope. You don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." But Tabitha did want to say it back. The realization had been growing in her for months, taking root in the fertile soil of his kindness and steadfast care. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long time." Under the vast Montana sky, they sealed this confession with a kiss that felt like coming home. The next morning, Tabitha woke to find Quentin already gone from his pallet. She found him in the kitchen with Hope, attempting to feed her porridge while she squirmed and giggled. "She's definitely got your spirit," he said when he noticed Tabitha watching them. "And your stubbornness," Tabitha replied, taking over the feeding duties. As she wiped Hope's messy face, Quentin cleared his throat. I've been thinking about our situation. Tabitha's heart skipped. What about it? Well, technically, we're not really married. Technically, no. I think we should fix that. Quentin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. It was my mother's. I had it in town being sized for you. Tabitha stared at the simple gold band with its small pearl setting. Are you asking me to marry you? For real. I am. Quentin knelt beside her chair. Tabitha, will you be my wife? Not just in name, but in truth. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, yes, I will. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. The ceremony took place on the porch of their cabin, with Mrs. Abernathy, the ranch hands, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Hope, dressed in a tiny white dress that Mrs. Abernathy had sewn, gurgled happily in the housekeeper's arms. Victoria Calloway was conspicuously absent, having departed for St. Louis the week before. According to town gossip, she had left in a huff after failing to find any scandal in her cousin's marriage. As Tabitha and Quentin exchanged their real vows this time, Tabitha marveled at how far she'd come from that desperate night in the abandoned shed. From the brink of death to the threshold of a new life. All because a kind-hearted cowboy had found her and called her his wife. That evening, after the guests had gone and Hope was sleeping soundly, Quentin led Tabitha to their bedroom. Truly, there's now in every sense. Are you nervous? He asked, noticing her hesitation. A little, she admitted. With Harold, it was never. It wasn't. This isn't like before, Quentin assured her, taking her hands in his. We have all the time in the world. And he was right. Their first night together as true husband and wife was nothing like her previous experiences. Quentin was patient and gentle, his every touch a question that she answered with increasing confidence. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, they discovered each other fully for the first time, learning the language of each other's bodies with the same care they'd learned the language of each other's hearts. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Tabitha felt a peace she'd never known before. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For finding us. For saving us. For loving us. Quentin pressed a kiss to her forehead. You saved me too, you know. I just didn't realize I needed saving until you came along. As summer turned to fall, and fall to winter, the Walsh family settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Hope took her first steps on a crisp October morning, toddling from Tabitha to Quentin with determined concentration on her tiny face. Mrs. Abernathy, who had threatened to leave once they were properly married, you don't need an old woman underfoot now, was persuaded to stay on. Who else will teach this child proper manners? She demanded, scooping up Hope with grandmotherly affection. When the snows came again, Tabitha often thought of that desperate night in the shed. But now, instead of fear, she felt only gratitude for the twisted path that had led her here, to this home, to this man who loved her with such steady devotion. On the anniversary of the day Quentin had found her, a blizzard raged outside their snug cabin. But inside, all was warmth and light as they celebrated with a special dinner and small gifts. I have something for you, Quentin said after they'd put Hope to bed. He handed Tabitha a rolled parchment tied with a red ribbon. She opened it to find the deed to the ranch, amended to include her name alongside his. Quentin, this isn't necessary, she protested. Yes, it is, he insisted. This is your home, your land. If anything ever happens to me, you and Hope will be secure. Tabitha set the deed aside and took his face in her hands. Nothing is going to happen to you. We have too many plans. He smiled, pulling her close. Do we now? What kind of plans? Well, for one thing, she said, her eyes sparkling with secret joy. Hope is going to need a brother or sister before too long. It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Quentin's face transformed with wonder. You're sure? Mrs. Abernathy confirmed it yesterday. The baby should come in early summer. Quentin whooped with joy, lifting Tabitha off her feet and spinning her around the room until they were both dizzy with laughter. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Quentin's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Tabitha reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Do you ever wonder what happened to Harold? Quentin asked, as if reading her thoughts. Sometimes, she admitted. Not because I miss him, but because I wonder if he ever regrets what he did. If he doesn't, he's a bigger fool than I thought, Quentin murmured, pulling her closer. It doesn't matter anymore, Tabitha said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. He gave me the greatest gift without knowing it. Hope. Yes, but not just her. He led me to you. She turned in his arms to face him. If he hadn't abandoned us in that shed, you never would have found us. Quentin brushed a strand of hair from her face. I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. As the blizzard howled outside, much like it had on that fateful night a year ago, Tabitha Walsh lay safe in her husband's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together. From abandonment to belonging, from despair to joy, the journey had been hard, but the destination was worth every step. Their daughter slept peacefully in the next room, and a new life grew beneath Tabitha's heart. The future stretched before them, bright with promise. And it had all begun in an abandoned shed, with a desperate mother, a newborn baby, and the cowboy who had found them and called them his own. The following spring brought new life to the Walsh ranch. The pastures turned emerald green, calves frolicked on wobbly legs beside their mothers, and Hope, now a sturdy toddler with Quentin's thoughtful eyes and Tabitha's determined chin, explored her expanding world with fearless curiosity. As Tabitha's pregnancy progressed, Quentin became increasingly protective, often insisting she rest while he took over her chores. Mrs. Abernathy observed these interactions with amusement. He hovers worse than a mother hen, the older woman remarked one afternoon as they watched Quentin and Hope from the porch. Father and daughter were feeding the chickens, with Hope giggling each time the birds pecked grain from her small palm. He's afraid something will go wrong, Tabitha explained, her hand resting on her growing belly. After finding me and Hope in such dire circumstances, I think he worries history might repeat itself. That man would move mountains to keep you safe, Mrs. Abernathy said. Both of you. All three of you soon. Tabitha smiled, watching as Quentin swung Hope onto his shoulders. I know. That's why I love him. As her due date approached, Quentin insisted on hiring a midwife from town to stay at the ranch. I won't take any chances, he declared when Tabitha protested the expense. Not with you or the baby. The midwife, Mrs. Pearson, arrived 2 weeks before the baby was expected. A no-nonsense woman with 30 years of experience delivering babies throughout the territory, she quickly established herself as an authority in the household. You're carrying low, she observed during her first examination of Tabitha. Could be a boy. Quentin, who had been pacing outside the bedroom door, perked up at this news. Though he insisted he would be equally happy with another daughter, Tabitha had caught him teaching Hope to say brother with suspicious frequency. The birth, when it finally came on a warm June evening, was mercifully easier than Hope's had been. With Mrs. Pearson's capable assistance and Mrs. Abernathy keeping Hope occupied, Tabitha brought their son into the world after just 6 hours of labor. Quentin, who had refused to leave her side despite Mrs. Pearson's initial objections, wept openly when the midwife placed the squalling infant in Tabitha's arms. He's perfect, he whispered, gently touching his son's tiny fist. Just like his mother. They named him Daniel Quinn Walsh, Daniel after Tabitha's father, and Quinn as a variation of Quentin's name. Hope, allowed into the room after mother and baby were cleaned up, approached the bed with wide-eyed wonder. Baby brother? She asked, peering at the bundle in Tabitha's arms. Yes, sweetheart. This is your brother Daniel. Tabitha shifted to allow Hope a better view. You're a big sister now. Hope considered this new responsibility with solemn importance. I help. You certainly will, Quentin assured her, lifting her onto the bed so she could sit beside Tabitha. Big sisters are very important. As Tabitha watched her husband and daughter bond with the newest member of their family, she felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. From the depths of despair in that abandoned shed to this moment of perfect joy, the journey still seemed miraculous. That summer, the Walsh family expanded in another unexpected way. A letter arrived from the sheriff in a neighboring county, inquiring if Quentin might consider taking in a 12-year-old boy whose parents had died of fever. The boy, Noah, had been working at various ranches but needed a permanent home. The sheriff says he's a hard worker, good with horses, Quentin told Tabitha, as they discussed the letter after the children were asleep. "But I won't consider it unless you're completely comfortable with the idea." Tabitha thought of her own desperate situation just 2 years earlier and how Quentin's generosity had saved her and Hope. "We should at least meet him," she decided. "Everyone deserves a chance at a family." Noah arrived 2 weeks later, a skinny boy with wary eyes and a defensive posture that spoke of past disappointments. He spoke little at first, answering questions with single words and watching the family interactions as if studying an unfamiliar language. But Hope, in her innocent way, broke through his defenses on the very first day. She toddled up to him as he sat awkwardly at the dinner table, offered him her favorite wooden horse, and said, "Play with me." The startled smile that crossed Noah's face transformed him, revealing the child beneath the hard exterior. Over the following weeks, that smile appeared more frequently as he found his place within the family. Quentin taught him about ranch work, patient with his mistakes and generous with his praise when Noah showed aptitude. Tabitha included him in family meals and activities, careful not to push too hard, but making sure he never felt left out. By the end of summer, when the time came to decide if the arrangement would become permanent, Noah himself provided the answer. "Can I call you Ma and Pa?" he asked one evening, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "If that's all right." Tabitha and Quentin exchanged glances, both fighting back emotion. "We'd be honored," Quentin replied, his voice rough with feeling. That night, after all the children were asleep, Tabitha and Quentin sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tabitha asked. "2 years ago, when you found me in Hope?" Quentin considered the question. "I hoped," he admitted. "Even then, something in me recognized what you could mean to me. But this," he gestured toward the house where their children slept. "This is beyond anything I dared to dream." Tabitha leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find myself back in that shed, that all of this has been a desperate dream." Quentin tightened his arm around her. "This is real, Tabitha. You and me, Hope, Daniel, Noah, we're real. The life we're building together is real." "I know," she whispered. "It's just that happiness this complete feels almost too precious to trust." "Then trust me instead," Quentin said, turning to meet her eyes. "I promised to protect you and Hope that first night, and I make the same promise now to our whole family. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The Walsh family prospered over the years that followed. The ranch expanded as Quentin acquired additional land and increased his herd. Tabitha started a small business selling preserves and baked goods to the general store in town, gaining a reputation for the finest apple butter in the territory. Hope grew into a spirited young girl with her mother's beauty and her father's quiet strength. Daniel, sturdy and thoughtful like Quentin, showed an early talent for working with horses. And Noah, who had arrived so wounded, blossomed under the family's love, eventually becoming Quentin's right hand in running the ranch operations. 2 more children joined the family: twin girls, Sarah and Sophia, born on a snowy December night in 1883. Mrs. Abernathy, now moving more slowly but still sharp-tongued as ever, declared them the most beautiful babies in Montana Territory and appointed herself their special guardian. The old hunting shed where Quentin had found Tabitha and Hope still stood on the edge of the property. One spring afternoon in 1885, Tabitha rode out to see it, drawn by a need to reconcile her past with her present happiness. The structure looked smaller than she remembered, its weathered boards gray with age and exposure. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through cracks in the walls. It seemed impossible that such a dark chapter in her life had begun in this unremarkable place. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Quentin's approach until he spoke from the doorway. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. "Are you all right?" Tabitha turned to him with a smile. "Yes, I just needed to see it again, to remind myself how far we've come." Quentin stepped inside, his gaze taking in the small space. "I think about that night sometimes. How close I came to riding past without stopping." "But you didn't," Tabitha said, moving to stand beside him. "You heard Hope crying. The best sound I've ever heard, though I didn't know it at the time." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "What do you want to do with this place? We could tear it down if it brings back painful memories." Tabitha considered this, then shook her head. No, it's part of our story. Without this shed, there would be no us. Then what? Let's fix it up, she decided. Make it a special place for the children. A playhouse, perhaps, or a secret hideaway where they can have adventures. Quentin smiled at the idea, transforming something broken into something beautiful. That seems fitting. Over that summer, the Walsh family worked together to renovate the old shed. Quentin and Noah repaired the roof and walls, making it weathertight and secure. Tabitha sewed curtains for the small windows, and the children helped paint the interior and exterior in cheerful colors. What had once been a place of abandonment and despair became the Adventure House, where the Walsh children played games, read books, and sometimes camped overnight under their father's watchful eye. On the 10th anniversary of the night Quentin found Tabitha and Hope, the entire family gathered for a special celebration. Now numbering 8, Tabitha and Quentin, the 5 children, and Mrs. Abernathy, who refused to be called anything but family, they sat around a bonfire near the transformed shed. Noah, now a thoughtful young man of 22, had arranged the celebration, feeling it was important to honor the moment that had created their family. Pa tells the story better than anyone, Daniel insisted as they roasted marshmallows over the fire. That's because he was the hero, Hope replied, now a pretty girl of 12 with her mother's gentle grace. Quentin shook his head. Your mother was the real hero. She kept herself and Hope alive until I happened along. Tell us anyway. The twins chorused, though they'd heard the tale many times before. So once again, Quentin recounted the story of that snowy night when a cowboy heard a baby crying and found a desperate mother who would change his life forever. As always, he downplayed his own role and emphasized Tabitha's courage. When he finished, Noah cleared his throat. I have something to say. The young man stood, suddenly looking nervous. 10 years ago, Ma and Pa showed what real love looks like. Not just romantic love, but the kind that takes in strays like me and makes them family. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. With your blessing, Ma and Pa, I'd like to ask Miss Lucy Harrison to marry me next Sunday after church. Tabitha gasped with delight. Lucy was the schoolteacher's daughter, a sweet girl who had been exchanging glances with Noah for months. You have our blessing, son, Quentin said, rising to embrace the young man. And our love. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Tabitha and Quentin stood on the porch of their home, now a sprawling ranch house that had been expanded several times to accommodate their growing family. Did you ever imagine this life? Quentin asked, echoing the question Tabitha had posed years before. She smiled up at him, the lines around her eyes speaking of a decade of laughter and joy. Never. But I wouldn't change a moment of it. Not even the shed, he teased gently. Not even that, she confirmed. Everything that happened led us here, to this life, this love. Quentin pulled her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been on that first night. I found a treasure in that shed, he murmured against her hair. The greatest treasure a man could ask for. As the years passed, the Walsh Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of prosperity and welcome. Travelers in need were never turned away, and more than one lost soul found their way back to life under Tabitha and Quentin's care. Noah married Lucy and built a home on a corner of the ranch property. Hope, after completing her education in Helena, returned home to teach at the local school, eventually marrying the son of a neighboring rancher. Daniel took increasingly more responsibility for the ranch operations, showing Quentin's head for business and Tabitha's compassionate leadership. The twins, different as night and day despite their identical appearance, pursued their own paths, Sarah becoming a skilled horse trainer whose services were sought by ranchers throughout Montana, and Sophia developing her mother's talent for preserving and cooking into a thriving business of her own. Mrs. Abernathy lived to the remarkable age of 93, remaining sharp-tongued and clear-eyed until the very end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, the entire community turned out for her funeral, honoring the woman who had mothered not just the Walsh family, but countless others who had passed through their lives. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their real anniversary, not the date they had first claimed as husband and wife, Quentin presented Tabitha with a journal bound in soft leather. What's this? She asked, running her fingers over the fine material. Our story, he replied. I had Noah help me write it down, just as it happened, for our grandchildren and their children after them. Tabitha opened the journal, tears filling her eyes as she read the first line. The chilling cry of a newborn baby echoed through the abandoned shed as the Montana winter of 1878 howled outside. "Oh, Quentin," she whispered. "It's perfect. I wanted them to know where they came from," he explained. How a moment of abandonment became the foundation for all of this. He gestured to the thriving ranch around them, to the homes where their children were raising their own families, to the community they had helped build. Tabitha closed the journal and held it to her heart. "From that shed to this life," she mused. "Who would have believed it possible?" "I did," Quentin said simply. "From the moment I carried you and Hope out of that shed, I believed we could build something beautiful together." As the sun set over the Montana landscape they both loved, Tabitha Walsh leaned against her husband's shoulder, surrounded by the legacy of love they had created from the most unlikely beginning. A cowboy had found her in her darkest hour, called her his wife when she needed protection, and then loved her into becoming the woman she was always meant to be. And she had done the same for him, transforming a solitary rancher into the patriarch of a family that would endure long after both of them were gone. Their story, beginning in abandonment and blooming into belonging, would be told and retold through generations, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and love. From a shed to a dynasty, from strangers to soulmates, Tabitha and Quentin Walsh had written a love story as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them.